Hello and welcome back to part two of the Jesus model as we build towards a large part of implementation with the vision God's given us. We're moving towards a component that's going to be, I feel like, massive in helping us continue to build a discipleship culture. But as we move towards that, I want to make sure I lay the proper foundations. So those of you that watched part one, we're kind of moving a little in depth more to understand. We kind of addressed the challenge. Now we're going to look a little bit more into sort of how Jesus conducted himself as we build to create a culture of discipleship. Again, remember, we're not simply trying to create a program or a class or a system by which you kind of go through the motions. This is really about defining culture and creating a culture of true discipleship. And when I say discipleship, really what I'm pointing to is transformation, transforming into the image of Christ. So when we say disciple, make sure you continue to understand that. That's not a label we just randomly throw out there that, oh, I'm a disciple. What defines a disciple? And truthfully, if you really want to boil it down to a very simplistic answer, discipleship is defined by someone who is desiring and who is intentionally seeking to be transformed into the image of Christ in every way. And so today we're going to discuss a concept that Jesus used so beautifully called invitation and challenge. Now, I said this last time, but I have taught this to our leaders already several months ago as we sort of moved into some phases of implementation of things God has already given us. But this is such a huge concept for us to understand. And again, it's not going to be a test on this. It's just more understanding some thing under the thing. It's an Antioch West term. In case you don't know what that means, you might have to go look it back up from the archives. Really understanding what's the thing under the thing about what's driving and creating culture, a discipleship culture for us here at Antioch West. I don't ride horses. In fact, I've never ridden a horse. I can't particularly say I like or dislike horses, but that's neither here nor there. But there's a man by the name of Monty Roberts. Maybe you've heard of him. Maybe you haven't. He's considered the horse whisperer. And I don't really know a lot about the story, but I came across maybe 18 months ago now, I came across a story of Monty Roberts, and I thought it was very fascinating, and it fit well with what I perceive how Jesus operated. And that is how Monty Roberts trained horses. Now, he grew up around horses. His dad, his family, he had connections. He was around horse training. But when he grew up, the method of training horses was somewhat brutal, if I could say that term. For example, they would tie a horse to a pole, and they would throw a blanket over the horse and continue to do that process until the horse became subdued or kind of broke its will. And there were other things that happened in the horse training world, from beating a horse or doing other things that would be somewhat cruel, if you could use that terminology, towards these animals. So he observed this, and he wasn't comfortable with that method of training. And so he was observing a pack of wild horses, and he noticed how a new young stallion was introduced to the herd. Now, I make sure I get all the details correct. If you go read the story and my details are a little off, there's multiple versions of this out there on the web. So I'm trying to find. I'm going off the one that I read, but there might be others that are a little different. But he watched the observation of a stallion being introduced into the herd. And what he noticed is that when they brought a young stallion into the herd, the lead mare would approach the stallion and would approach and would assume a posture of challenge to the stallion. It would be somewhat of an intimidation and a tactic, and she would stand there with a challenging posture until the young stallion would sort of cower to her. As soon as that would happen, she would turn and she would expose her flank. to this young stallion. And for a horse to expose their flank is their greatest area of vulnerability. So after the challenge, she would expose her flank, and in that exposing of her flank would invite the stallion to come closer. The stallion would come closer, and as it approached the mare, she would turn again and resume this posture of challenge and intimidation. And the stallion would again sort of cower, and then she would expose her flank again. This process would continue over and over again until the young stallion was fully introduced to the herd. And this invitation and challenge back and forth balance, this delicate dance of introducing a young stallion into this herd was mesmerizing to Monty Roberts. And so he took this concept and he adapted that concept to his training of a horse. And what was amazing is that he could take even the most abused horses and train them in just minutes using this similar technique. I've watched videos on YouTube of it, and it's quite mesmerizing to watch, I have to be honest with you. But this was interesting to me, not that I'm a horse trainer or have a desire to train horses, but I thought this was interesting because let's shift this invitation and challenge into the model that Jesus Christ lived by. But before we do that, let's take a step back for a moment and let's consider what Jesus was able to accomplish in his time on earth. In less than 3 years, he was able to disciple a group of men, most of whom no one else would have ever chosen, and taught them to do and be like him in such a way that when they were finally released, when they were finally sent out, they would change the course of human history forever in 3 years. Now, how was Jesus able to do that? What was the method he used? What were the techniques he used? What was his method by which he accomplished this goal? And how did he do that in such a way that he didn't break them and have them all running to the hills because it was too much? But he was able to challenge them to change without destroying them and them giving up in 3 years. This is the delicate balance that he did so beautifully. That's why this invitation and challenge dance between the mare and the stallion that Monty Roberts observed was so fascinating to me, because it paralleled what I see Jesus doing with his disciples in this delicate balance of invitation and challenge. Now, this is important. We're going to get to that in just a minute, why this is important and how this fits into building a discipleship culture. So if we could do this, simply put, Jesus really is the ultimate horse whisperer in a lot of ways when it comes to discipleship, because he was able to create a discipling culture in which there was an appropriate mix of invitation and challenge. In a way, he related to them as humans and their needs, but challenged them to go beyond and be like him. Now, this is really beautifully illustrated in Matthew chapter 16, when Peter receives the revelation that Jesus is the Son of God. I'm going to read it to you. Matthew chapter 16, it says, Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by man, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. And I will give you the keys of the kingdom." Now, that's verse 17 and 18. There's more to that story, but this is a beautiful illustration of Jesus' affirmation to Peter, this invitation, this connection he's building with Peter. And this invitation in Jesus is inviting Peter to come closer. This affirmation of revelation, this renaming, that you shall be Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. This invitation of a greater purpose, this invitation of a greater relationship, a greater dimension, is drawing Peter closer to Jesus. But Jesus takes it even further, because more than just calling him a different name, he's really establishing Peter's identity going forward. He's giving Peter something that Peter, I don't think at the time understood what it was. Just like you and I, so many times God puts us in things in us that we really don't understand the magnitude of them in the moment, but that seed planted in our heart pulls us closer to Him. And really, in a lot of ways, he was affirming to Peter that the relationship that Jesus demonstrated with the Father, that Jesus is offering that same relationship with Peter. Upon this rock I will build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against us. He's giving this, not only is he giving Peter an invitation, a relationship, but he's also saying, because of the relationship, here's the authority that I'm going to give to you. This was an amazing moment for Peter. It had to be an amazing moment to watch and see demonstrated. But here's the crazy part about that. You have this beautiful moment of invitation, this relationship, this connection, this powerful moment of affirmation. And then a few verses later, Jesus brings a challenge to Peter. Because he turns to Peter and says, because Jesus said, this is what's going to happen. Peter says, no, it's not going to happen. And he turns to Peter in verse 23. This is 6 verses later from affirmation to turning around 5-6 verses later in the conversation. That's just a few minutes later. He turns to Peter and says, you're a stumbling block, verse 23. And you do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of men. That's right after he said, get thee behind me, Satan. So he gives this invitation, but because of that invitation of intimacy and that trust factor he built up, he was able to challenge Peter. Because let's be frank, if Jesus would have said that to a lot of us, we would have got offended. We would probably quit. We would have probably hightailed out there and go, that's it. This is not new to me. I've said it. I've heard it said and I've used it many times. If Jesus was your pastor, would you go to church? Because Jesus said things and did things that, if you took it in a vacuumed context of just simply the statement, it was harsh, it was strong. He turned to that woman that day and said, sorry, I can't help you. I'm not doing anything. And she goes, even the dogs get the crumbs from the master table. So Jesus had this strong challenge. But what made people receive this challenge? Not everybody that received the challenge accepted it. A lot of walked away. But in reality, it was because he balanced invitation, relationship, intimacy, trust. He built this foundation so that challenge and invitation were balanced. Now, this is a big point we're going to get to in just a moment. Because if we look at it time and time again in the Gospels, we see Jesus functioning in this sort of invitation challenge matrix and this delicate balance between both of them, from inviting his followers to intimate relationship with him to initiating a direct challenge to behaviors, to attitudes, to thought processes that he knew were either wrong or unhealthy, and constantly going back and forth in this. He drew his disciples close. He loved them. He gave them responsibility. He gave them authority. But then he would back that up with challenge. Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. We're continuing right after he just says this to Peter. He says, if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself, take up his cross, follow me. For whoever wants to save his life and will lose it. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for me will find it. I think that verse is a beautiful verse that kind of shows this invitation and challenge. He said, come after me. I'm inviting you to come after me. Come here. Know me. Find me. Learn of me. But here's the challenge. Deny yourself. Take up your cross. But then he backs it up again with an invitation. Follow me. So sort of the cream in the middle of the Oreo cookie is the challenge. But what makes the Oreo cookie so good is the 2 wafers of invitation that creates this delicate balance. And because of this, in 3 years, Jesus was able to disciple a group of men that nobody wanted and change the world. because he was able to do this delicate balance of invitation and challenge. Invitation is about being invited into a relationship where you have access to a person's life and all the vibrancy, safety, love, and encouragement that resides there. You learn from the places you clearly see Jesus at work in people's lives that this was happening. This was taking place. We see this played out so beautifully, but was always balanced with a challenge. The challenge to live, to accept, to embrace, to pursue an identity as a son and daughter in the kingdom. This is so beautiful, and because of this, we can take this thought process, and again, I'm giving you a really brief teaching on this. There's more to this, but we can take this because this idea of invitation and challenge, where we balance out relationship, trust, love, acceptance, sharing lives, building community with one another. We build that so that we can challenge, and that challenge can be placed in the proper perspective because it's balanced. And here's why I say that, because let's look at this for a moment, and I'm going to share with you this diagram a little bit because I want you to see why this is so important, that we don't lose sight of invitation and relationship, connection, community with our up, our in, and our out, right? We talk about this. We'll talk about this again more. We've got to have relationship with Him, with one another, because you can't really understand challenge without invitation, which is invitation to relationship, invitation to intimacy. And that's not just a vertical call, but it's also a horizontal call for us to be with one another, share one another, love one another. By this shall all men know you're my disciples, because you have loved one for another. That's invitation and challenge baked into that verse. But here's why this is important. Let's take this for a moment. Let's create a little bit of a diagram here. Now let's call this, this is going to represent high invitation. We'll just put in INV because I don't have enough room there to write it all. And this is going to represent low invitation, INV. And over here, we're going to let this represent low challenge. And this is going to represent high challenge. I don't have enough room here to write all that up. Now, why is this important? Because it creates 4 different quadrants of balance here, and each one of them has, three of these have really a positive and a negative, and only one is where we want to live in the one. So let's look at this for a second. Let's place our church, or the operation, the Vision of Antioch West in the lower quadrant, which means we would have low invitation, low challenge. And what I mean by that is we don't have a lot of connections, we don't have a lot of relationships, vertically or horizontally, and there is no challenge. There's low challenge and low invitation, meaning we're not creating community, we're not building relationships with God and with others, we're not loving one another, but also there's no challenge to change either. It's just sort of, we're just floating along on the river of life. That creates what we're going to call this the boring quadrant. And really, the culture, again, we want to create a discipling culture. This really creates an apathetic culture. This is ultimately creating a boring, apathetic culture. No challenge, no invitation. So let's overcorrect again. Let's go, okay, man, we really need to make connection. We got to change this. So here's what happens. We need to make connections. We need to build community. Let's do that. So what we do, right? Because we want people to feel connected in a community. So here's what happens. We don't want to be here, so let's go up here. This is better. Because here's the problem. This is the way a lot of churches have changed, because churches realize we can't live, we got to be a community, right? So we do that. So they build high invitation, high connection, high community priority. But what this does is it creates what I'm going to call pop culture churches. This is pop culture churches. Cool lights, cool show, hour service, let's get in, get out. But we have, we build some fun things, built-in community program, all that stuff. Not saying it's bad, but that's what we shoot for. But in reality, what it does is produces, what kind of culture does it? If this produces an apathetic, this produces a cozy culture where everything's comfortable because there's no challenge. We're not going to tell you, you're not going to tell you sin is sin. We're not going to tell you it's to stay where you are. We're going to let you stay where you are. God loves you. Don't worry about it. Anything goes. You're accepted. Community. This builds a cozy culture. So, we don't want to do that because Jesus did not build a cozy culture. We don't want apathetic, so let's change it. Okay, we need to challenge people. Let's come over here. Let's challenge people. This has got to be it. So you know what this is? This is what I'm going to call the stress or pressure quadrant. This is stress and pressure because it's high challenge. We're not really focused on connection, community, love, because that's too cushy. We're supposed to be good soldiers, and we're supposed to, live for God, work for God. We're supposed to be holy. You're wrong. Do it wrong. Just do's and don'ts. Get it done. That's a stress pressure culture, which pressure quadrant, which really produces a discouraged culture. This is a culture of discouragement. A lot of stress, a lot of pressure, discouraged. In fact, if I could say it this way, this is where I feel like religion lives. Religion loves to live in this environment. That's where religion loves to live. If you think about it, Pharisee environment. There's a very Pharisaical environment. Think about the Pharisees. They weren't into connection and invitation. They were into high challenge, but no connection. So we don't want to be apathetic. We don't want to be cozy. We want to be discouraged. So what do? We got to live over here. This is ultimately it. This is what I'm calling the disciple quadrant. This is the disciple quadrant. This is creating because we got high invitation, but we have high challenge. And really what this does, it produces a culture of empowerment. You are the sons and daughters of Christ. We accept the identity because we have a relationship, but we accept it and we have authority to use our identity because we have accepted a challenge. If any man come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, follow me. There it is right there. High invitation, high challenge produces disciples, but the discipling produces empowerment because Jesus took that group that heard that call and sent them out and said, have I been sent, so I send you. If you want to be empowered, you got to be a disciple. If you want to be a disciple, you got to chase invitation, but you can't dismiss challenge. This is why this is so important. Most churches today want to be more in this way. We want to create comfortable environments. They call it seeker-sensitive environments. Don't say sin, that's bad. Don't say, right or wrong. You can't do that. Don't. You'll scare people away. Well, Jesus did. He didn't scare people away. So, over here, this group's going, you can't do that. So over here, we're saying, you're wrong. You're going to burn in hell. If you even think a bad thought, you're going straight to hell. Crispy, extra crispy. And then we go, wait a minute, that doesn't work. So what do? We bounce back and forth between these two, or usually what ends up happening, we go, both don't work, and we end up just in an apathetic culture. And like everything, in our desire to fix one thing, we overcorrect to something else. So if we're over here, in order to fix this, we overcorrect and we end up over here. If we over here, we overcorrect and we end up here. But in reality, Jesus was able to find the balance to live in this quadrant of invitation and challenge. Why is this important? Because when you create a culture like that, you have the ability to hear the challenge, but accept the challenge because there is a culture and an environment and a community of invitation that's surrounding you. For example, just because someone preaches on forgiveness does not make you forgive. Because teaching without accountability doesn't produce change. So why is this important? Because as we build connections, and that's why this is important to understand, because we're going to get to later on what we're calling apps. These are high challenged groups, but they're also extremely high invitation. They're going to be the ultimate balance of invitation and challenge. Now, for example, our small groups probably skew more towards invitation. Nothing wrong with that because of the dynamics of the group, the makeup of the operation of the groups. They're more high invitation. That's okay, but we can't just have that as our main component. And then there's teaching and things we do. That's high challenge. But we can't do that. We got to have the balance. So we use different things to balance it out. But ultimately, the place where it all comes together is going to be in our apps because they're high invitation, high challenge. And this is why this is so important for you to understand and understand the concept behind this, because again, what we're doing, and forgive me here, I lost my cap and my marker's going to dry out. This is a huge thing for you to understand, knowing that Jesus created this delicate balance between invitation and challenge, and that's what we're desiring to do. And every component of what we do is going to address a challenge or an invitation. Every part of our structure and our vision and the implementation of our vision has one or these components in it, or both. Maybe one of more or less of one. For example, a small group has a high invitation and some challenge, but not an equal amount. But the place where it all comes together and creates the culture and the environment is going to be in our apps. And again, I said apps last time. Don't panic. I'm not talking about technology or an app on your phone. These are just, it stands for something else. We'll get to that later. So again, I want you to understand this as we get further into a little more implementation and understanding of how this is going to work, that this is really driving us to create a discipling, empowered culture. And how do we build that? We build it through invitation and challenge, just like Jesus did. So we're going to continue to explore Jesus' model, but this was a huge part of how Jesus was able in 3 years to take this group of men and push them to change so drastically in 3 years, but do it without breaking them, without sending them running, saying it's too much, can't do it, because he understood this balance. We live in a world that I still believe in right and wrong. I still believe in sin. The Bible's still true, and the Bible still has things in it that says, thou shalt not. There's no doubt. We can't start stripping things out of the Bible because, they may offend people. How do we teach the truth of the Word of God on delicate subjects that our world's dealing with right now, and things that are being spoken in our world today that don't line up with the Bible, but neither can we just come out and speak against these things because they're going to hurt people who don't know any better. How do we find that balance? We find it by finding this balance of invitation and challenge. We can't hide from the truth of the Word of God, but the Word of God was never meant to be a weapon we use against people. We build invitation and then we speak challenge, but we follow that challenge with invitation. And we find this delicate balance as we introduce new people into the herd, and as you and I continue to grow and create our own discipleship journey of transformation to Jesus Christ. Now, this was brief, short, I threw a lot at you, but we're going to refer back to this a little later on as we continue to build this implementation of the apps to understand this concept right here. Now, there's so much more here. I could do it so long, but I promise you I'm trying to keep these videos shorter. I respect your time and your attention span and trying to keep these within about 30 minutes. So we're going to stop right there, even though there's so much more I'd like to unpack for another time. But invitation and challenge. We're building a discipleship culture following Jesus' model. God bless you. As always, thank you for watching. We'll come back again next week for part 3 as we continue to create a discipleship culture, and we are all seeking to be transformed in the image of Jesus Christ.